Hello, I'm Carly Greene. This is a re-recording of the talk I presented yesterday. So I want to once again thank Kagan, Laura, and Kosar at the VAC for inviting me to participate in this series of talks with Creative Mornings presented by the Victoria Arts Council. Thank you again to Studio 531 for sharing your space with us yesterday morning for the live version of this talk. And I too want to acknowledge and express my gratitude for the privilege of living and working in the territories of the Lekwungen peoples, the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich First Nations. In the context of this talk and the theme of treasure, it's important to reflect on how the treasures of the land, waters, and people of these lands continue to be threatened and destroyed by extractive capitalism and the ongoing effects of colonial violence. And an example I thought of immediately, which pertains to the project I'm going to discuss today, is the decline of the native Olympia oyster in and around Victoria and Vancouver Island more broadly. Once abundant and an important food source for Indigenous peoples, the onset of colonization and industry, particularly in the era of the gold rush, brought about devastating pollution and overharvesting so that these oyster beds were quickly depleted and have never fully recovered. And it's something that is, of course, not an isolated event. We see it every day. And it's also something I was thinking and learning about in the research I did for the project I'm about to share with you. And as an artist working with materials, I feel it's my responsibility as an artist working with materials and who is in some ways endeavoring to kind of create treasures, it's a responsibility to always be thinking about what are the histories and stories of the materials that we work with. So as you listen to my talk this morning, I'm going to ask you to ruminate on the following prompts. These are sort of meant to be a map of the things I thought about in the project and in preparing for this talk. And hopefully it's a chance to bring the theme into your own experiences and context. So the first is the thrill of the chase. What is the role of desire in the hunt for treasure? The second is systems of value. What makes something a treasure? And then the third is treasuring as an everyday act. How do we care for the things that we treasure and how can that extend outwards? So without further ado, this is the tale of the pearl necklace. I am and have always been a pack rat. I love junk drawers and catch-all bowls. And I'm gonna just share my screen with you quickly. Here we go. I've got some images to kind of support this as I go along. So yeah, I both intentionally and unintentionally accumulate things in and out of the studio that inevitably find their way into the artworks. And over the last few years, I've made a number of works that are dealing directly with this. So for example, this image and this image are works where I was collecting debris from kind of like my everyday experiences, so junk that would kind of accumulate in the bottom of my bag or in my pockets, along with more intentional created objects. So, this set of keys you see here that are cast bronze alongside, so sort of this like high art material alongside this kind of like beautiful detritus from the everyday. And this really kicked off my thinking about the project I'm going to share with you, this idea of these spaces where all of that stuff kind of coalesces and these themes of accumulation can kind of like come through. So for my thesis exhibition, I created an installation called Nacre, which centered on oysters and pearls as both a primary material and a metaphor. And it would be a bit of a fool's errand to try and describe the exhibition in its entirety. So I'll just click through some images with you as I carry on. But the installation consisted of sculpture, video works, and site-specific spatial interventions. And I was trying to find ways of kind of embodying an oyster and wanted viewers to feel like they were on the imaginary inside of an oyster shell, if the inside of a shell looked like sort of the living room of a sitcom set. So I made a wall, which was kind of this like central object in the space, and it's based off of a section of my own apartment at the time. So that was kind of where the domestic space came in, and then the installation kind of was built up around it. Yeah, and I was using oysters and pearls in relation to, again, this daily detritus of things like hair elastics, earplugs, receipts, while spatially referencing this domestic space. So thinking about those junk drawers and how things kind of accumulate in the home. And I was putting into proximity the profane and the precious and explored themes of accumulation, material hierarchies, and systems of value kind of within the everyday. So this is a wall where this is the wall I showed you before, where these things, these sort of like everyday things are embedded in it. And then it was, I'll speak about it a little bit later, but it's got these layers of luminous plaster over top. Some video works that existed in the installation. This is a screenshot of one of the works where I was like trying to embody the process of forming a pearl with my own body, the way an oyster, a cultured oyster would do this. And I'll talk a bit more about that process later, but yeah, it's like sticking these things in and like, what does it take to make them pearls? That was the idea. It's kind of gross. Yeah, so, but the piece I'm going to focus on is this one here. This is the pearl necklace. And it was also kind of a cornerstone piece of the exhibition. It's made from 550 cultured freshwater pearls, each one harvested, drilled, and strung with my own hands. And the string, when laid out in a line, reaches approximately 15 feet. And on close inspection, so if you get up close to it, you can discover that each pearl has its own unique shape, color, and luster. And I think, you know, you can't deny the kind of yummy beauty, the sort of seductiveness of this particular piece. But the story of these pearls goes beyond that seductive object that you see here. Like many treasures, it too is troubling. So when I started this project, I was doing research into oysters and pearls, and I came across this image online, and it just grabbed me. I couldn't kind of believe what I was seeing. It's such a weird image, very sort of like bodily, like a little bit repulsive, and it looked to me like ovaries or something. So I was really intrigued, and I clicked on the Amazon ad and learned that this was an image of freshwater mussel that's been cultured with anywhere between 15 to 30 pearls. You know, there's varieties of these that you can find online. And you can order the mussel to be shipped kind of across the world and straight to your home, and then experience the thrill of opening it and discovering the gems within. And I had kind of always believed that finding a pearl in an oyster was the rarest of things, quite akin to finding a treasure. But so often is the case, humans have found ways to take the guesswork out of this experience with their intervention. And it can now be boxed up and sent straight to your door. So I was fascinated and I ordered a few right away. And going back to these themes, like I was interested in sort of like this idea of accumulation, and the pearl is kind of the perfect metaphor for that. So I was learning about how they're formed, and pearls are formed when some kind of irritant, be it a grain of sand or a parasite, gets into sort of the soft body of the mollusk, and being unable to expel that irritant, instead the creature starts secreting nacre, or mother of pearl, which is this substance made from calcium carbonate and different kinds of proteins that it would then use to coat the irritant in these cumulative layers until a pearl is formed. So that's like a very literal kind of accumulation to create this gem that we so sort of like covet. And cultured pearls, which are real pearls, are produced sort of the same way, only it's through human intervention. So there's a small surgical process where you sort of insert a piece of mantle from another mollusk along with a small nucleus, which is often like a piece of freshwater mussel shell, and that triggers the nacre process. So then the oyster starts producing nacre and coating these nuclei to create cultured pearls. And this process was kind of first reliably established in Koya oysters by a man named Kokichi Mikimoto in Japan at around the turn of the 20th century. And since then, there's been an entire industry that's kind of grown up around cultured pearls. I had even heard of someone named Diver Dave up in sort of the Tofino area who was trying to culture pearls in California blue mussels, but I never could get a hold of him. So I also learned about something called pearl parties, which are events that were kind of very popular on Facebook, where participants pay a fee and then a host, having previously ordered sort of bulk shipments of cultured oysters or mussels, crack them open for each participant during a live stream. And they sort of like pull the pearls out, and then the gems that range in color and size, the host spends time kind of gushing over them, and then they measure it against a chart or an index of some type to assign it a dollar value, and then kind of ascribe meaning to it, whether it be like usually based on color, whether it be about luck, love, prosperity, or the like. So there's this sort of superstition that's built in around it as well. And then finally, they will send you as the participant your pearl, usually in some kind of like jewelry setting, like a pendant or some other kind of jewelry form. But I just thought that was so fascinating, this idea of like people paying $20 and then getting this experience, and even one more step removed where they're not even pulling the pearls out themselves, which in some cases they are, but but this experience that's sort of like a treasure hunt that you can do at the comfort of your own computer. Anyway, it's so weird. And there's been whole sort of multi-level marketing companies built up around this as well. But the mollusks that I ordered, they were sent from China and arrived individually wrapped in plastic. They were a lot larger than I was expecting. So these were about the size of my hand. And they weren't Koya oysters, they were freshwater mussels. And I was so excited. I cut them open and they stunk so bad of some kind of preservative, and various sort of like levels of decay. But you could crack open the shells, and then you just start digging through the bodies of these mussels and popping out all of these little pearls. And I have a video of this. It's pretty gross to watch, so I didn't end up using it in the exhibition, but like it's one of those things where it's really gross, but you can't look away. But you can see here the flesh of the mussel, and like just pulling through it. It's such a visceral experience. And I definitely did have that like thrill as I was doing this, right? Like I was really excited with each pearl that I would pop out. And I kind of continued this process for a while. I ended up ordering about 25 of these mussels, and at various stages would cut them open and start pulling out the pearls. And I'll come back to that in a second. But I was also just really going back to this interest in how we create value or determine value in things. I spoke with a gemologist in Montreal who specialized in Tahitian pearls. And she described to me the way values were determined in sort of the gemology world, by the thickness of the nacre, the luminosity, weight, shape, color, and sort of the type, whether they're saltwater or freshwater, cultured or natural pearls. And according to those standards, the pearls that I was collecting were of the lowest quality, but I love them. So originally my plan was that this was going to be an ongoing work where I would just keep adding pearls, keep collecting these pearls. But along the way, and through this project, I'm trying to think through how we, determine these values, and this role of extraction. That's what I was kind of like reflecting on. So I couldn't reconcile or ignore the troubling aspects of commodification and extraction that were intrinsic to the process, nor the abject and ethical realities. And that's what this project really became about, was recognizing this stuff and kind of thinking through it. And I was literally digging through bodies to pull out these pearls. So So I could, and further to that, I could only find like precious little information on where these mussels were coming from, or the conditions around their cultivation. So the more of this like fleshy, beigey meat I dug through, the faster that like thrill of the treasure hunt wore off, and I could focus on sort of the reality of this process. So I decided to stop, and then I was just left to contend with my pile of treasures. So with my treasure hunt had ended, I carefully drilled a hole through each of the pearls, and I'm just going to pull up a video quickly to show you that, because it's it was one of the videos that I had in the exhibition. Pause for 1 second, bear with me. So on one of the screens back behind the wall, I had this video playing about the process. So yeah, with my treasure hunt ended, I drilled a hole through each of the pearls, and I learned how to knot them into this like absurdly long string. So I tied each one onto silk thread and made this necklace. And then the exhibition, as you saw, it hung from this custom steel stand where viewers could come up close to it and kind of admire it alongside the wall I built, which had those everyday objects in them. And on the wall, I had started coating the wall itself and these layers of and these objects I embedded in it with layers of this luminous Venetian plaster, which have a material link to the oysters through this calcium carbonate base, but I could go on and on. There's like a lot of inside baseball material links that happen. But again, it was like I had these real pearls next to this wall that I was trying to like make a pearl. So the wall was like my way of, again, trying to like build value into this thing that didn't have a lot of like intrinsic value. So the thing I was thinking about, again, in relation to this project, is how treasuring something is not a passive act. It indicates a responsibility of care. And I'm going to go back to my other image. It indicates this responsibility of care. So I couldn't leave the pearls to just hang there. They need to be maintained, or else they'll lose their luster, turn yellow, chalky, and degrade. And as I was researching ways of properly caring for these pearls, I learned that wearing them is one way of maintaining them, and that the natural oils of your skin help to keep them hydrated. It's sensitive. You can't put like perfumes or too much sweat on them, but your natural oils in your skin will keep them hydrated, and help them be maintained. So I thought that was like really a lovely way to talk about that care. To place them into this intimate proximity with my own body meant that there could be some kind of reciprocity with them. So I started wearing them around. I would like wear them to work, to openings, and I wore them for critiques in my class that I was teaching. My students were like, "Why? Like, what is going on?" I also wore them during my defense, along with a very striking Celine Dion sweatsuit, and I wear them from time to time at home still, and will continue to try and help kind of like maintain this closeness to them, and take care of them. But the funny thing is that when you wear them, they're ridiculously long. Like there's a bit of absurdity in this whole project, and they're so long, and they're uncomfortable, and they get tangled really easy. And then slowly, the longer you wear them, they like start to kind of creep up and choke you. And I always said that was their little act of revenge. Yeah, so that's kind of the tale of the pearls. And as a bit of an epilogue, about a month or so ago, or nearly a year since I put my pearl project to bed, I brought in 4 oysters just from the local supermarket to barbecue in the half shell at lunch for my work for reasons unimportant. I have my camp barbecue at work, but this was mostly meant to be kind of like a nice thing for me and a joke for having exhausted everyone I know talking about oysters for the last 2 years straight. So I thought it'd be fun to have like this delicious lunch alone at work for no reason on a Thursday. And they were delicious. I ate the first 3 in quick succession, but as I bit into the last oyster, drenched in butter and lemon juice, my tooth came down on something hard. Cursing, I reached into my mouth to dig out what I thought was the piece of shell I nearly cracked my tooth on, and thought about how I needed to get better at shucking. But as I dropped it into my palm, I laughed out loud. There, oh, I forgot I'm out of order. Oh, I'm ruining it now. There in my hand was a perfectly round pearl. So this is the final pearl. Like now I have to think about, I think I'm just gonna add it to the necklace and it'll sort of sit in there and mix along with the rest of the pearls I pulled out of the mussels. But it's the, it's the thing of that was an unintentional experience versus the one I had kind of ordered off Amazon. So there's stuff to think through there. And I just couldn't believe it when when I pulled it out. I phoned my supervisor and we had a good chuckle about it. But yeah, so I think I'll leave it there and Kosar can kind of splice in the question and answer period. We had a great discussion yesterday. So thank you again for listening to the talk and to the VAC for having me. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Take care.
Enter the oysters, does that affect the shape and color and what the pearl comes out of?
Yeah, I think it definitely affects the shape. In terms of the coloring of the pearls, what I understand is it has a lot to do with whatever proteins that particular species or type of mollusk produces mixed with whatever's in the water of that area. So that can really affect the different colors of the pearls. Yeah. Thank you.
Just for the sake of the viewers at home, when we ask questions, maybe you can repeat the question.
Oh, sure.
I was interested in those muscle opening videos. And when you said that they would reveal something, I immediately thought, oh, it's like a fortune teller. Is that right?
A little
like
bit.
reading tea leaves?
Yeah, a little bit. They have this like pink stands for love and gold stands for prosperity. And there's different ones. Like I found a bunch of versions of that for different companies that I had kind of looked at. So in my exhibition, the way I kind of talked about that is I had one oyster inserted into the wall that I made. And it was whispering its own kind of sales pitch. So you would have to lean in and kind of listen, and it was telling you, oh, get this pearl, get this, order it for Valentine's Day, or like whatever the script was. But yeah, this system of assigning meaning to them in this sort of superstitious way, I think kind of has that relationship. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the word culturing, because it's a pretty interesting word. And is it only used when it's artificial?
For the pearls?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mikimoto kind of came up with that term, cultured pearls, as I understand it, and stuck with it. Like was very adamant about labeling that clearly.
Yeah.
So to me, and this is discussions I had a lot when I was making this process, but culturing kind of means this cultivating. So it's when you're building up the meaning for it. So it is that sort of cumulative process of being cultured, I guess. Whereas natural pearls are doing a similar thing, but it's happening without any kind of intervention. It's like an allergic reaction.
I see.
In the pearl. So I think it's really important that it's that human intervention where the culturing aspect comes in.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. I'm also, can you repeat the prompts for?
Yeah.
I'm kind of like trying to connect them back to.
Yeah, and if
Thank
anyone has thoughts, that would be great. So the first one was thrill of the chase.
Mhm.
So what is the role of desire in the hunt for treasure?
Mhm.
The second one was systems of value. What makes something a treasure?
Mhm.
And the third is treasuring as an everyday act. How do we care for the things we treasure and how can that extend outwards?
Hmm.
I also have more things to pass, but
I can respond to the prompts if you'd like.
sure.
When I think about the chase, I think more about like childhood or play. And I think it's maybe a feeling that gets pushed down when we grow older, not to be able to like feel the excitement of things as much
Mm.
because we've been harmed by disappointment. So I think the desire, I connect less to it. But when I think about the systems of value, which is the second one, I think there's a lot of things where I'm like thinking about how they will be perceived and how they will show me to other people. Like even if I have a treasured piece of art, it's so much more about how people will see me by
Mhm.
looking at it. Of I'm the person who owns this thing
Right.
or can afford to buy it or is cool enough to have this thing. And then how do I care for them? Yeah, I found the symbiotic relationship of you and the pearls very interesting of you have to actually like give your sweat and and body to gain this other body or kind of care for its offspring in a
Mhm.
way. That was very interesting, like as a point of connection to that.
Well, and I think too, I didn't really talk about this before, but I've been thinking about it a little bit, but that thrill of the chase. So the other morning, I was in my laundry room and our building caretaker was there. We'd somehow gone to a conversation about he's a gold panner. And he was talking about all of these kind of like adventures that he went on across Canada looking for gold and other kinds of precious gems. And how, you know, that's the part he kind of remembers because he says he has gold and gems buried across Canada, but he can't remember where they are. But what he has is kind of like that story, the memory of the search, the chase, that like anticipation, that desire. And that's kind of what keeps him going back. It's not even so much the treasures themselves, it's like the experience of that. But I was also thinking about like the explorations down to like the Titanic and that sort of thing. Like I know maybe that's a stretch, but that's what's taking people down there, right? Is this like this desire and maybe agreed. Like I do think there's a greed attached to that in certain contexts. So it's something to think through. And I definitely was thinking about that when I was taking out the pearls, is like this feels so greedy. Like this poor mussel has 30 allergic reactions in its body and I'm just keep grabbing more, you know? So there's something about that just I keep going back to with the project.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's
no
evidence to support it.
Keep it on thrill. Do you think so much of your work has such a process and your hands are and everything? Do you think that's part of the thrill and the chase? It's just like how you work through it.
Yeah, so the question was in terms of the process and like working through materials and and processes as you're creating the artworks. Is that part of this thrill of the chase? And I think that's kind of the essential thing. If you're an artist, it always feels like you're chasing something, you're seeking something. And then when you get to the end of it, you're kind of like, well, move on to the next thrill sort of thing. And mine is very much that. Like I got so deep into the materiality of these things. Like there was all of these like very inside baseball material connections throughout the exhibition. This is some lime putty that I made from, shout out to the Wandering Mollusk, who gave me a bunch of their discarded oyster shells from shucking all day. And I learned that you could burn them to make your own quicklime. that then you can use to make mortars, cements. They were used in this historical process called tabby, which was an architectural technique where people would use it as a mortar and mix it with actual oyster shells to create structures. Yeah, so I had to try that and do that myself. But yeah, it's like chasing down these threads, along a path, and you go. Don't open it. You can just look at it.
I'm curious about, because we're on the West Coast and abalone or mother of pearl is so prevalent in specific Salish artworks.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking also on the East Coast, there's, I don't know if it's like a rumor or fact, but that Manhattan is built on oyster shells.
Yeah.
Centuries of discarded oyster shells. And so I'm just wondering, in your research, how, if at all, you navigated the Indigenous dealings with the material.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm a settler, so I don't have that cultural relationship with the abalone shell or with mother of pearl in that way. I spoke to a friend of mine, Carver Everson, who was in the MFA program with us. Sorry, I didn't repeat the question. The question was about Indigenous sort of practices using abalone shells in their artworks and cultural artifacts here on the West Coast, and also about the rumor of Manhattan being built on oyster shells on the East Coast, which I'll get to after. But yeah, speaking with Carver, I did ask him kind of about that practice and learned a little bit about how they thought about it. I tried to stay away from anything that felt like I was bridging into that. My connection to the oysters originally started from, like, I'm from Alberta and I have an uncle who lives up island. And when we would come and visit him, there was a bed out front and we would collect oysters off the beach in the mornings and like have them barbecued in the half shell before dinner. So I had a very nostalgic connection to them that way, but I did do a lot of research about the history of them in this place. And that's where I kind of learned about the decline of the Olympia oyster and some of those extractive practices that became really harmful. And then talking about Manhattan, there was like huge oyster beds there, and oyster reefs, oyster beds are natural breakwaters. Oysters are water filters, so they clean the water at like an incredible rate. So they're really important ecosystems. But industry, again, they like dredged all the harbors, so they destroyed all of those oyster beds. There's a project I was reading about recently called, I think it's called I can't remember, it's Million or Billion Oyster Project, where they're trying to redevelop those beds. So they're getting spat, which is like baby oysters, and like raising these things and rebuilding that oyster reef. And I think it's happening in multiple places, but in New York, that's one of them. Yeah, and there's actually a project in the gorge that I just found out about. Their website's, I think, fairly new, but they're working on rehabilitating Olympia oysters in the gorge because there are still some beds there. So they're kind of maintaining and like watching over those as well.
Nice.
Yeah. Did that answer?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
One maybe last comment.
Okay.
When you're talking about systems of value, I also think about the ethics of like when you're talking about it's a living thing and how those systems of value are also hierarchies of existence for the way we see animals or people in this superiority hierarchy.
Yeah.
And how like a nervous system becomes something to ethically justify, like a lack there of a nervous system makes us justify the use of many things that are still living beings.
Yeah.
Or and that how that value system is parallel to the biological hierarchy of how we see other beings and non-humans.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a very like, it really like got my mind thinking about that.
Yeah.
With your talk.
Yeah. And you just like the mussels that came in the Amazon packages, you just like toss in that body away. Like their job is done, I guess. Like where do you,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit tricky. Yeah.
To close off, do you want to say like what's ahead of you, or
Okay.
how maybe this project informed your current projects, or?
Sure. Okay, I have one more thing to hand around to the room. So I've kind of left the oysters there. And I've started working on a new project, which I'm tentatively calling Small Things. I was gonna call it All the Small Things, but I don't know if that joke's gonna land. But I've been interested in almonds, another food thing, as a symbol. I was reading about the amygdala and this kind of part of our brain that's an almond shape, and it's really responsible for storing emotional memory, and also sending out signals of how to process and like react to those things. So anyways, long story short, I started casting these bronze almonds, and also peach pits, which are related. They're both in the amygdala family. Yeah, so that's what the show's going to be for Sunday. Come on by. And I don't know exactly where it's going to go yet, but that's kind of what I've been thinking about. And I wanted to cast them in bronze because I was thinking about sort of the weight of small things.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's real life size from.
Yeah.
Wonder how much the history of gendered art practices plays into your want and exploration of sculpture, especially bronze, which is, you know, historically a very masculine or male-oriented medium, and it's only been lost, like say 75 or 100 years that women are working in it more publicly.
Yeah, so the question was about the perhaps gendered influences of working with certain materials, and in this case specifically bronze. And I think so in Alberta there's this tradition of very intense, like heavy steel sculpture. And I know it's kind of everywhere, but it's got a very masculine history to it. So when I started working in sculpture, I just love working with metal. But I was kind of more interested in working with it at a more delicate scale, something that felt more intimate to the body, like I could hold it in my hands, or it was to scale with me. Something that felt lighter. I was making all these like very delicate steel structures. And I think just by sort of subverting that tradition a little bit, by making it feel small or precious or somehow more intimate, that's a good word, yeah. Maybe that brought more of a feminist approach to it.
I'm thinking too, we're so lucky to show Carly's work as part of the group show last year at the Arts Council, and you had one of the funniest works in the show, I think.
Thank you.
Which was, if I correct me if I'm wrong, that was called Smile.
It's called Greene.
Grin.
Yeah.
And it was this lovely, like, or maybe co-stars on it, but yeah, great. But an articulated metal apparatus that then a small necklace of pearl necklace hung in a semicircle. Very funny. And I think exactly what you're kind of like, it's like a wink and a nod.
Yeah, definitely. That piece in particular, it's kind of like, it was kind of looking like a couple of little, I said they could either be cheeks or nipples. And then it's got this pearl necklace and a little smile hanging from it. And it's kind of a dirty joke, you know, but again, like handling the steel in a way that made it feel softer and a little bit more fine or delicate, kind of speaks to that direction, I think. Yeah, thank you so much.
Great way to
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming.